I am Kendra, 34 years old, and I just watched my husband of 12 years try to give away my entire real estate empire to his pregnant mistress. He lay in a sterile hospital bed recovering from a severe cardiac event, looking me dead in the eye and telling me I was a barren failure who deserved absolutely nothing. I just smiled, adjusted my designer coat, and prepared to end his entire existence with a single piece of paper. Before I tell you how this luxury hospital suite turned into a scene of absolute karma, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind an arrogant man exactly who holds the real power. Growing up on the south side of Atlanta taught me very early that silence is often a woman's greatest weapon, a vital shield against a world that constantly tries to tear you down. I married Desmond when I was only 22. He was charming, loud, and loved being the center of attention, especially at our local church, where he paraded around as a pillar of the community. For 12 years, I played the quiet, supportive wife. I deliberately stayed in the background, allowing him to take the unearned credit, the applause, and the deep respect of our peers. I let everyone believe that he was the mastermind behind Desmond Properties, the highly successful real estate management company that controlled millions of dollars in luxury residential assets. He truly believed his own fabricated hype. He thought he was untouchable. That grand illusion came crashing down on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I received a frantic phone call that Desmond had collapsed during a business meeting and had been rushed to Emory University Hospital. I dropped everything and drove through heavy traffic, my heart pounding with genuine fear for the man I had built a life with. When I finally arrived at the VIP cardiac suite out of breath and clutching my purse, the fear instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Desmond was propped up against a stack of crisp white pillows. He looked pale in exhausted wires trailing from his chest to a complex monitor that beeped in a steady, annoying rhythm. But he was not alone. Sitting on the edge of his bed, holding his hand and stroking his arm, was Jasmine. She was 23 years old, a former receptionist at his office, and she was very clearly pregnant. I stopped in the doorway, taking in the bizarre scene. The harsh smell of clinical antiseptic mixed horribly with the overwhelming scent of Jasmine's cheap floral perfume, creating a toxic atmosphere that turned my stomach. Neither of them looked ashamed when I walked in. In fact, Desmond's face quickly twisted into a cruel, arrogant sneer. "You took your time getting here, Kendra." He rasped, his voice weak but dripping with undeniable venom. "But it does not matter. You are just in time to hear the new arrangements." I slowly walked into the room, my heels clicking softly against the linoleum floor. I did not scream. I did not throw my bag. I simply stood at the foot of his bed, folding my hands together gracefully. "What arrangements, Desmond?" He coughed, gripping the thin hospital blanket tightly. "I am changing my will today. My lawyer is on his way right now with the new paperwork. I am leaving all 6 of my luxury properties to Jasmine. The Buckhead estate, the Midtown townhouses, the lake property, all of it goes to her." Jasmine looked at me with a triumphant, sickly sweet smile. She placed a hand protectively over her rounded stomach. "He has to think about his future, Kendra. He has to think about his legacy. I am giving him a son. I am giving him the family you never could." The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the sterile air of the hospital room, thick and suffocating. For a decade, I had endured the relentless whispering of the women in our community. I had smiled through the pitying looks at church when another year passed without a pregnancy announcement. I had listened to Desmond's mother tell me to pray harder, to eat healthier, to be a better wife so God would finally bless my womb. I had carried the heavy, suffocating burden of our infertility in complete silence to protect him. "A legacy," I repeated quietly, letting the heavy word roll off my tongue. "Yes, a legacy," Desmond shouted, though the extreme effort made him wince in sudden pain. The monitor beside him beeped a little faster. "A man needs blood to carry on his name. We were married for 12 years. Kendra. 12 years of empty bedrooms and dashed hopes. I built a massive empire with my bare hands, and I absolutely refused to leave it to a barren woman who failed her most basic biological duty." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a hateful intensity that erased any lingering affection I might have held for him. "You are leaving my house empty-handed. You can pack your bags tonight. Jasmine is moving into the master suite. She is the mother of my child, and she deserves to live like the queen of my empire. Jasmine patted his chest affectionately. Do not get yourself worked up, baby. The doctor said you need to keep your stress down. She will leave. She knows when she is beaten. She turned her gaze to me, her eyes filled with mock sympathy. You can take the guest room furniture if you really need it, Kendra. I am completely redesigning the house anyway. I want the nursery to be perfect. I looked intently at this young, naive girl, so completely intoxicated by the illusion of wealth that she had no idea she was dancing on a trap door. I looked at the man I had vowed to love through sickness and health, realizing he was nothing more than a hollow shell of a human being. They thought they held all the winning cards. They thought they had cornered a helpless dependent housewife who would break down weeping at the thought of losing her comfortable suburban life. Instead of crying, I felt a genuine smile slowly stretch across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator, watching its prey step willingly into a cage. I did not raise my voice. I did not curse at them. I just stood there, perfectly poised, radiating a dangerous calm that suddenly made the room feel 10 degrees colder. You want to talk about biology, Desmond? I asked softly, taking a deliberate step closer to the side of his hospital bed. You want to talk about leaving a legacy for your bloodline? Desmond frowned, a flicker of deep confusion crossing his pale face. What are you babbling about? Just get out and wait for the divorce papers. Oh, I am not going anywhere, I replied, maintaining unbroken eye contact with him. Because before your lawyer gets here to sign away those 6 luxury properties, we are going to have a very honest conversation about exactly who owns what, and more importantly, exactly who is growing inside Jasmine's stomach. The heart monitor beside Desmond's bed suddenly spiked, the rhythmic beeping accelerating rapidly as a deep primal panic began to dawn in his wide eyes. Before Desmond could even open his mouth to respond to my threat, the heavy wooden door of the VIP suite swung open. In walked his sister Tanya, dragging her husband Caleb right behind her. Caleb was a tall, ruddy-faced white man who always wore suits that were slightly too tight and a fake smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He had married into our prominent black family a decade ago, immediately latching onto Desmond's rising status like a desperate parasite. He currently served as the lead property manager for Desmond Properties, a job my husband practically handed to him out of sheer pity. Caleb strutted into the hospital room, aggressively checking his heavy gold Rolex, completely oblivious to the thick, suffocating tension hanging in the air. Well, look who finally decided to show up, Caleb sneered, crossing his arms over his chest as he glared at me. Desmond's lawyer just pulled into the parking garage. He is 5 minutes away. You need to hand over the keys to the Buckhead estate right now, Kendra. We all know you only stayed in this marriage for a free ride. It is time for you to pack your bags and head back to the south side where you belong. Tanya stepped out from behind her husband, her face twisted in a mask of pure disgust. She looked from me to the pregnant mistress sitting on the bed, and instead of defending my 12-year marriage to her brother, she immediately sided with the homewrecker. Caleb is right, Kendra, Tanya hissed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger in my direction. My brother has worked his fingers to the bone building this massive real estate empire from the ground up. Did you honestly think you could just sit around our mansion, completely fail to give my brother a child, and then inherit all of his millions? Jasmine is giving this family a future. You are just a glorified secretary who got lucky. I looked at my sister-in-law, marveling at the sheer audacity of her delusion. For 12 years I had hosted their Thanksgiving dinners. I had purchased their children's expensive Christmas gifts. I had smiled politely while they drank my expensive wine and made passive-aggressive comments about my modest upbringing. A glorified secretary, I repeated smoothly, my voice dangerously calm. Is that what you call me behind my back, Tanya? Caleb let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed terribly against the hospital walls. What else would we call you? You play around with your little consulting gig on your laptop while Desmond goes out and brings home the real money. You do not know the first thing about building generational wealth or running a business. I turned my gaze slowly from Tanya to Caleb, locking eyes with him. That is a very interesting perspective, Caleb. Because 5 years ago, your precious contracting business was drowning in exactly $400,000 of insurmountable debt. You were facing total bankruptcy. The bank was threatening to foreclose on the beautiful suburban home you and Tanya live in. Caleb stiffened, his mocking smile faltering just a fraction. We survived that rough patch through the grace of God, he stated defensively, puffing out his chest. A silent angel investor from our church congregation stepped up and paid off the debt. Desmond facilitated the introduction. The Lord provides for hardworking men. The Lord provides. I agreed, taking a deliberate step toward him. But Desmond did not introduce you to any silent angel investor, Caleb. He came crying to me in the middle of the night because he was terrified his sister would end up homeless. I was the silent angel investor from the church. My little consulting gig generated the $400,000 that saved your business, your home, and your fragile pride. Tanya gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she looked wildly between me and her husband. Caleb, is she telling the truth? She is lying, Caleb shouted, his face turning a deep, angry shade of crimson. Desmond gave her that money. Desmond was the one funding everything. She just wrote the check to make herself feel important. Desmond never had $400,000 in liquid cash to his name, I stated firmly, my voice cutting through his pathetic lies with absolute precision. He was drowning in terrible commercial loans at the time. I bailed you out, Caleb. I kept a roof over your head. I allowed you to sit at my dining table and brag about your business acumen while I silently held the deed to your entire life. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out the original promissory note, complete with Caleb's signature. I held it up for the entire room to see. You have been living on my charity for 5 years. You act like you are the master of this family, but you are nothing more than a glorified tenant. So before you ever fix your mouth to tell me to go back to the South Side, you need to remember exactly who paid for the ground you are standing on. Caleb stared at the legal document in my hand, his arrogant demeanor completely evaporating. He looked desperately at Desmond for help, but Desmond was still clutching his chest, his eyes darting frantically between my confident smile and the pregnant mistress sitting beside him. The trap was closing in around them all, tightening with every single breath they took. I own you, Caleb, I continued. I could call my financial team right now and recall that loan in full. I could take your house, your cars, and every single asset tied to your name. You would be begging for scraps by the end of the week. Caleb opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The harsh reality of his vulnerability was sinking in. He took a stumbling step backward. Tanya grabbed his arm. Tell me she is making this up. Caleb stared at the floor. The heavy silence in the room was absolute perfection. Caleb could not even look his wife in the eye. Tanya dropped his arm as if he had suddenly caught fire. She took a slow, horrified step away from the man she thought was providing for their family. The grand illusion of Desmond as the benevolent savior and Caleb as the hardworking businessman had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces right on the hospital floor. But Jasmine, possessing more audacity than common sense, decided this was the perfect moment to reclaim the spotlight. She puffed out her chest, resting both hands protectively over her rounded belly. Well, none of that ancient history matters now, Jasmine announced, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet arrogance. Desmond is leaving his properties to me. I am carrying his son. I am giving him the exact legacy you failed to produce, Kendra. So you can wave around whatever old banking receipts you want. A mother always outranks a barren wife. I slowly turned my attention away from the rapidly crumbling marriage of my sister-in-law and focused entirely on the foolish young woman currently sitting on my husband's hospital bed. Desmond nodded weakly in agreement with Jasmine, a smug, vindictive smirk returning to his pale, sweaty face. He truly believed his unborn child was his ultimate trump card, his final victory over my supposedly broken body. He wanted to see me shatter. I wanted to watch me fall to my knees and beg for the scraps of the life we had built together. Instead of crying, instead of breaking down into the hysterical weeping mess they all desperately wanted to see, I simply smiled. I reached into my designer leather tote bag for the second time that afternoon. The sharp sound of the metal zipper opening seemed to echo loudly in the tense, quiet room. I bypassed my wallet, reaching deep into the interior pocket. My fingers grasped a thick, sealed manila envelope. The heavy parchment paper felt like a loaded weapon in my hands. I pulled the envelope out and held it up to the harsh fluorescent hospital lights. Stamped across the front in bold, undeniable red ink was the official logo of the Atlanta Fertility Clinic. The date printed directly below the logo was from exactly 10 years ago. A collective breath seemed to catch in the room. Desmond's smug expression instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden, terrifying realization. His eyes darted to the envelope, his pupils dilating in absolute horror as he recognized the distinctive blue seal. "Put that away," Desmond choked out, his voice suddenly sounding like grinding sandpaper. "Kendra, put that away right now, I am warning you." "Why should I put it away, Desmond?" I asked, my voice carrying a deceptive melodic sweetness. "You just spent the last 20 minutes humiliating me in front of your mistress and your family. You stood in our church for an entire decade and let the congregation whisper about my empty womb. You let your own mother hand me pamphlets for adoption agencies and brew me awful fertility teas. You let every single person in our lives believe that I was the reason we were suffering through a childless marriage. You soaked up their sympathy while I silently absorbed their judgmental stares." I broke the old brittle wax seal on the envelope and slowly pulled out the certified medical file. I carefully unfolded the crisp white papers, clearing my throat softly. "You see, Jasmine, 12 years ago, when we first started having trouble conceiving, we went to the best specialists in the entire state. They ran every single test imaginable on my body. And do you know what they found?" I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, ensuring everyone was hanging on my every word. "They found absolutely nothing wrong with me. I was perfectly, entirely, and exceptionally healthy." Jasmine frowned, her hands tightening protectively on her stomach. "Then why did you not have a baby?" "Because of this," I replied, holding up the medical diagnosis for the room to see. "I am going to read this aloud just to make sure there is absolutely no confusion today. Patient name, Desmond Vance. Diagnosis, a rare genetic condition. The results state that Desmond has a 0% sperm count. He lacks the biological architecture to ever produce a child. He is 100% permanently and irreversibly sterile." The monitor beside Desmond's bed began to blare a rapid, frantic warning. Tanya gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in utter shock. Caleb stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. Jasmine froze completely, her jaw dropping open as all the color drained instantly from her youthful face. "That is impossible," Jasmine whispered, her voice shaking violently. "The doctor confirmed my pregnancy. I saw the ultrasound. I heard the heartbeat. I am actually pregnant." "Oh, I have absolutely no doubt that you are pregnant, Jasmine," I said smoothly, stepping closer to the bed. "But you are certainly not carrying Desmond's child. My husband has been shooting nothing but dust since the day he was born. He could not father a child if his life depended on it." Desmond let out a pathetic, strangled whimper. He clutched the hospital blanket, tearing his gaze away from me to stare at the young woman he was about to give his entire fortune to. His chest heaved heavily as he desperately struggled to process the monumental, undeniable destruction of his own carefully constructed reality. "I kept your secret, Desmond." I continued, my tone turning sharp and unrelenting. "I kept it for 10 agonizing years. I swallowed my pride. I endured the cruel gossip. I protected your fragile, pathetic male ego because I knew how much your image meant to you in our community. I sacrificed my own reputation so you could walk around pretending to be the ultimate flawless patriarch. I let you play the tragic patient husband while I played the inadequate wife." I dropped the heavy medical file directly onto his lap, right over his utterly useless legs, letting the crisp pages scatter. "But you threw my loyalty back in my face. You brought this girl into our lives and used her pregnancy to try and destroy my spirit. So now you get to face the devastating reality of your own biology in front of the exact audience you brought here to watch me fail. Your legacy is nothing but a lie, Desmond. And trust me, Desmond, it is about to get much, much worse." Desmond's chest heaved erratically as his monitor screamed a frantic rhythm into the sterile air. He looked like a man drowning on dry land. His trembling hands gripped the white hospital sheets, pulling them so tight his knuckles turned a translucent shade of gray. He stared at me with bloodshot eyes, silently begging me to say it was all a sick joke. I did not blink. I simply watched his entire world crumble piece by agonizing piece. Jasmine was completely paralyzed on the edge of the mattress. Her earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a cornered animal. She clamped her hands over her mouth, her gaze darting wildly around the room. She was looking for an escape route, but the only door was blocked by Tanya and Caleb. Tanya was not a stupid woman. Despite her fierce loyalty to her brother, she was incredibly observant. She caught the frantic, desperate look passing between her husband and the pregnant mistress. Tanya took a slow, deliberate step away from Caleb, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Caleb," Tanya whispered, her voice trembling with a sudden dark suspicion. "Why is she looking at you like that? Why is this girl staring at you like you are supposed to save her?" Caleb practically jumped out of his skin. His face, already pale from my earlier financial threats, now took on a sickly greenish hue. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping against the doorframe. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Tanya. The girl is clearly just distressed. Kendra is standing here making up crazy lies to ruin your brother. We should leave. We need to go wait in the lobby for the lawyer right now." He reached for his wife's arm, but Tanya violently slapped his hand away. She kept eye contact with Jasmine. "Do not touch me, Caleb. Kendra said it is about to get worse. What else could possibly be worse than my brother being sterile?" "I will gladly show you," I said smoothly. For the third and final time today, I reached into my designer tote bag. I bypassed the medical files and pulled out a thick stack of glossy photographs. The distinctive, vibrant colors of the freshly printed images seemed to glow under the harsh hospital lights. I walked directly to the side of Desmond's bed and dropped the entire stack squarely onto his lap, letting them fan out across the white blanket. Desmond looked down. His breath hitched audibly in his throat. Tanya shoved past Caleb and practically sprinted to the side of the bed to see what I had thrown down. The photographs were crystal clear captures from a discreet security camera. They featured the front porch of a luxury midtown townhouse. It was a beautiful property, one that Desmond had explicitly purchased through our management company specifically to house his young mistress. But Desmond was not the man in these pictures. The first photograph showed Caleb and Jasmine standing closely together on her front porch in the middle of a sunny Tuesday afternoon. The second photograph showed Caleb wrapping his arms around Jasmine's waist and kissing her deeply. The third photograph showed Caleb using his master property management key to unlock her front door. The final photograph showed the two of them walking inside the townhouse together, their hands roaming all over each other. Every single photograph was perfectly time-stamped in the bottom right corner. "You see, Desmond," I explained, my voice cutting through the thick silence like a freshly sharpened blade. "You gave Caleb absolute authority over the Midtown properties. You gave him the master keys to ensure the maintenance was up to your lofty standards. But Caleb decided to take a much more personal approach to managing your affairs. He has been visiting Jasmine's townhouse twice a week, every single week for the past 5 months. Always in the middle of the afternoon, right when you are busy leading your executive meetings." Desmond picked up the photographs with shaking, clammy hands. He stared at the image of his sister's white husband, passionately kissing the woman who was supposed to be carrying the heir to his empire. A single pathetic tear rolled down Desmond's cheek. He looked at Caleb. Then he looked at Jasmine's stomach. The horrifying, undeniable realization hit him like a massive freight train. "That is your baby," Desmond rasped, pointing a violently trembling finger at Caleb. "You slept with my woman. You slept with my woman inside a house that I bought for her. You got her pregnant, and you were going to let me raise your child. You were going to let me give away my entire fortune to your bastard son." Caleb threw his hands up, backing out into the hospital corridor. "Desmond, please listen to me. It meant absolutely nothing. I swear to God it meant nothing. She came on to me. She said she was lonely because you were always working. I am a man. Desmond, I made a stupid mistake." "A mistake!" Tanya screamed. It was a blood-curdling, guttural shriek that rattled the medical equipment. "You disgusting, filthy animal. We have been married for 8 years. You brought this trashy girl into our family and humiliated my brother." Tanya lunged at her husband. She tackled Caleb right into the hallway, her manicured nails clawing wildly at his face and his expensive suit. Caleb shouted in panic, trying to push his furious wife off of him. He shoved Tanya hard against the wall, desperately trying to protect his face from her relentless attack. Inside the room, the situation descended into chaos. Jasmine burst into loud theatrical sobs, sliding off the hospital bed and collapsing onto the floor. She hugged her knees to her chest, wailing hysterically as the reality of her shattered meal ticket finally dawned on her. Desmond's heart monitor began to blare. He clutched his chest in agony. I just stood there quietly and watched them all completely burn. The hallway door swung wide open as hospital security arrived to pry Tanya off her bleeding husband. Stepping cautiously around the writhing bodies was Mr. Davis, Desmond's legal counsel for a decade. Clutching a thick leather briefcase, his eyes darted frantically from the sobbing mistress to the bruised property manager. He adjusted his glasses, unprepared for the war zone he walked into. "Desmond," Mr. Davis stammered, "I received your urgent message. I brought the updated will and the property transfer documents you requested. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting for a more appropriate time." "We are doing this right now," Desmond roared, slamming his fist against his hospital tray. He hunched forward, wheezing heavily, clutching his chest as the heart monitor screamed in the background. Nurses rushed in, trying to force an oxygen mask over his face, but he swatted their hands away. He was running on pure adrenaline and wounded pride. "Do not touch me," Desmond yelled at the medical staff before turning toward his lawyer. "Get your pen out, Davis. We are tearing up the entire document. I am not leaving a single dime to this lying, cheating harlot." He pointed a shaking finger at Jasmine, who wailed louder, burying her face into the cold linoleum. "Desmond, please," Mr. Davis pleaded, opening his briefcase with trembling hands. "You are not in the right state of mind to make binding legal decisions." "I said write it down," Desmond commanded. "She gets nothing. Caleb gets nothing. My sister gets nothing. I want them cut out permanently. And as for my treacherous wife—" He paused, shooting me a glare filled with venom. "Kendra gets nothing either. Draft a new clause immediately. Sell the Buckhead estate. Sell the Midtown townhouses. Liquidate the lake property and the commercial lots. I want those houses put on the market tomorrow." I maintained my perfect posture, smoothing the fabric of my dress. "And what exactly are you planning to do with all that imaginary money?" "I am giving it all to my fraternity," he shouted back, a manic glint returning to his eyes. "I am leaving my fortune to the Brotherhood. They are the only men who truly respected me. I will fund a new alumni center in my name. I will watch you walk out of this hospital with nothing but the clothes on your back. You will be penniless." Before Mr. Davis could uncap his pen, a loud scoff echoed from the hallway. Caleb pushed his way past a stunned security guard, wiping a streak of fresh blood from his cheek. His suit was torn at the shoulder, and his tie hung loosely around his neck. Despite being publicly exposed for sleeping with his brother-in-law's mistress, Caleb's staggering audacity remained intact. He shoved his way back into the room, glaring defiantly. "You are not selling anything," Caleb demanded, pointing a rigid finger at the hospital bed. "You cannot just liquidate those properties and leave me out in the cold. I poured my sweat and tears into managing those buildings for 5 years. I dealt with the contractors. I handled the tenant disputes. I am entitled to a massive cut of that estate for my sweat equity." Tanya, restrained by a nurse in the doorway, let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Sweat equity? The only sweating you did was on top of my brother's mistress." Caleb ignored his furious wife, stepping aggressively toward Mr. Davis. "I know my legal rights. I have an employment contract with Desmond Properties, LLC. If he sells those houses, I am taking 30% of the gross profits off the top. You owe me." Desmond looked like he was going to spontaneously combust. His chest heaved with violent breaths. "You ungrateful thief! You slept with Jasmine in my own house. I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work in Atlanta again." "You cannot ruin me because I hold the keys to the kingdom," Caleb shouted back, his face turning a blotchy red. "I know the passcodes. I know the alarm systems. I know the vendors. If you try to cut me out of this deal, I will tie those properties up in litigation for a decade. I will bleed your LLC dry." Mr. Davis held his hands up, trying to restore order. "Gentlemen, please. This is a hospital. We cannot conduct business under these hostile conditions. Desmond, you cannot arbitrarily liquidate assets without a spousal release from Kendra. The law simply does not work this way." "Make it work!" Desmond roared, slamming his head back against the pillows. I am the CEO. I am the head of this family. I demand that you draft the paperwork right now and force her to sign it. I watched these two arrogant men scream at each other over an empire they did not even own. Caleb believed his proximity to black wealth gave him the right to demand a slice of the pie. Desmond believed his title gave him the ultimate authority to destroy my life. They were completely wrong. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, capturing the attention of every single person in the room. The screaming stopped. The crying ceased. Even the nurses seemed to hold their breath. I looked at Caleb. Then I looked at Desmond, whose face was a terrifying shade of purple. Are you two quite finished throwing your little temper tantrums? I asked, my voice echoing clearly in the sudden silence. This argument is incredibly embarrassing, deeply pathetic, and completely pointless. Desmond narrowed his eyes. Sign the papers, Kendra. Do not make this harder than it has to be. I am not signing anything, Desmond, I replied softly, offering him a razor-sharp smile. And Mr. Davis is not drafting any new documents today. You cannot sell the Buckhead estate. You cannot liquidate the Midtown townhouses, and Caleb cannot claim 30% of the profits. You are fighting over properties that you have zero legal right to touch. The truth was finally catching up to them. Desmond opened his mouth to argue, but the heavy hospital door swung open once again. This time it was not a nurse or a confused security guard. Walking into the chaotic suite was my personal corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling. He was a formidable man dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, flanked by two towering private security guards. The guards immediately stepped to either side of the door, folding their arms and blocking anyone from leaving or entering. Mr. Sterling ignored the bloody property manager panting by the wall. He ignored the wailing mistress clutching the floor tiles. He ignored the furious husband hyperventilating on the bed. He walked directly toward me carrying a massive, heavy leather-bound binder. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling said smoothly, his deep voice radiating absolute authority. "I brought the original trust documents and the certified property deeds you requested. The financial transfers have also been fully frozen as per your instructions." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I replied, taking the heavy binder from his hands. Desmond stared at the new arrivals, his chest heaving as the monitor beeped frantically. "Who the hell is this Kendra? You do not have a corporate attorney. You are a housewife. And what do you mean the financial transfers are frozen? Mr. Davis, tell this man to leave my hospital room right now." Mr. Davis, the family lawyer, simply took a step back, recognizing a vastly superior legal force when he saw one. He clutched his briefcase against his chest, refusing to meet Desmond's wild, desperate eyes. Caleb pushed himself off the wall, his bruised face twisting into a mask of pure panic. "You cannot freeze anything," Caleb shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Mr. Sterling. "Desmond Properties LLC is a registered corporation. I am the lead property manager. I have legal contracts. You cannot touch the accounts without Desmond's signature." I walked right up to the hospital bed and dropped the heavy leather binder directly onto Desmond's lap. The loud thud made both Desmond and Caleb flinch. "Open it, Desmond," I commanded, my voice dripping with cold, hard reality. "Since you refused to read any legal paperwork for the last 8 years because you said legal jargon was for the help. You just wanted the fancy title of Chief Executive Officer to put on your social media profiles. You wanted to walk into our church and have other men call you a boss. I gave you that illusion. Now open the binder and read the actual deeds." Desmond hesitated, his trembling fingers hovering over the leather cover. Slowly dreading what he might find, he flipped it open. His bloodshot eyes scanned the highlighted sections of the first document. "This says the Buckhead estate is owned by a blind trust." Desmond rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Apex Heritage Holdings." "What is Apex Heritage Holdings?" "The LLC is supposed to be on the deed." "An LLC is just a management company, Desmond," I explained, leaning over him so he could not escape my gaze. "Desmond Properties LLC does not own a single brick, a single piece of drywall, or a single blade of grass. Your company was nothing but a hollow shell created to manage the maintenance, collect the rent, and pay the local property taxes. You were never the owner. You were just a glorified, overpaid maintenance man. And Caleb was just the guy you hired to fix the leaky toilets." Caleb let out a strangled gasp, sliding slowly down the wall until he hit the floor. Tanya, who had been watching the scene unfold with wide eyes, let out a harsh, bitter laugh. If the LLC does not own the houses, Jasmine sniffled from the floor, wiping mascara from her tear-stained cheeks. Then who owns Apex Heritage Holdings? Desmond must own it. He is the one with all the money. Desmond has never had any real money, I said, turning my sharp gaze to the foolish young girl. When I married Desmond 12 years ago, he was drowning in student loans and massive credit card debt. I paid off his debts using the profits from my software algorithms. I quietly built a massive portfolio of corporate investments. I bought the Buckhead estate with my own cash. I purchased the Midtown townhouses with my own stock dividends. I acquired the lake property to diversify my growing financial portfolio. I bought every single asset with my own personal wealth. Desmond's face turned an ashen gray. He flipped frantically through the pages of the thick binder, looking at deed after deed, legal document after legal document. Every single one named Apex Heritage Holdings as the sole undisputed owner. And who do you think created Apex Heritage Holdings, Desmond? I asked softly, stepping back to let the devastating truth fully land. Who do you think is the sole founder, the sole funder, and the 100% undisputed owner of that blind trust? Desmond looked up at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying, crushing realization. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but absolutely no words came out. He was completely paralyzed by the catastrophic destruction of his fragile male ego. He suddenly understood that his entire life was a lie. "It is me, Desmond," I stated firmly, ensuring every single person in the room heard the absolute truth. "I am Apex Heritage Holdings. I own the Buckhead estate. I own the Midtown townhouses. I own the commercial lots. I even own the luxury townhouse where your brother-in-law has been sleeping with your pregnant mistress. You never owned a single thing in our entire marriage. I bought those houses. I built this empire. I let you put your name on the front of the management door because I truly loved you. I wanted to protect your foolish pride. But a king who betrays his loyal queen instantly loses his shiny crown. You threw away a faithful billionaire wife for a cheap fling with a receptionist. Your reign of terror is officially over today." Desmond's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. The heavy leather binder resting on his lap seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. He stared at the letters of Apex Heritage Holdings, the physical proof of his ruin, his hands shaking violently. The monitor beside his bed detected his rising panic, the rhythmic beeping accelerating into a frantic, high-pitched warning. "You cannot do this to me!" Desmond wheezed, spit flying from his lips as he struggled to sit up. "I am your husband. I am the head of this household. You owe me for the 12 years I gave you. You gave me nothing but lies and a masterclass in manipulation." I replied, my voice steady and devoid of sympathy. "Mr. Sterling, please inform my former property manager of his current employment status." Mr. Sterling stepped forward. "Desmond Vance, effective immediately, your contract with Apex Heritage Holdings is terminated. Desmond Properties LLC has been formally dissolved as of 1 hour ago by emergency executive order. Your corporate access codes are deactivated. Your company credit cards are canceled. You no longer have legal authority to enter the properties, collect rents, or make financial decisions on behalf of my client." Desmond let out an agonizing sound. It was the sound of a man watching his entire identity disintegrate into dust. He looked desperately at his own lawyer, but Mr. Davis had already backed away toward the door. The older attorney was silently packing his briefcase, determined to avoid getting caught in the crossfire of my corporate legal team. I turned my gaze toward the two miserable creatures cowering near the hallway. Caleb was bleeding from where Tanya scratched his face, and Jasmine was curled into a pathetic ball on the cold linoleum floor, hugging her pregnant belly. "As for you two," I said, pointing at the trembling property manager and the weeping mistress, "your luxurious love nest is also owned by my trust. I am serving you both with an immediate eviction notice. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your cheap clothes and vacate the Midtown townhouse. If you leave a single scratch on my hardwood floors, or if you are on the premises by tomorrow afternoon, Mr. Sterling will have you arrested for criminal trespassing." "Kendra, please," Caleb begged, falling to his knees in the hospital corridor. His previous arrogance was gone, replaced by raw desperation. Tanya is going to divorce me. I have no money. My contracting business is gone. You cannot throw me out on the street. I am your family. Tanya let out a hysterical bark of laughter. She stood over her kneeling husband, her eyes blazing with heartbreak and pure rage. You are not family, Caleb. You are a parasitic leech. You slept with my brother's mistress and got her pregnant. I am taking the house, the cars, and the bank accounts. You will be sleeping in a cardboard box by Friday. Jasmine wailed louder, burying her face into her trembling hands. Where am I supposed to go? I have a baby coming. Desmond promised to take care of me. He promised me the Buckhead estate. Desmond cannot even afford to pay his own hospital bill today, I reminded her coldly. The crushing weight of those words broke through the last remaining barrier of Desmond's denial. He looked at Caleb, the white brother-in-law who gladly accepted his charity, while secretly sleeping with his mistress. He looked at Jasmine, the naive girl carrying a child that was supposed to be his legacy. He looked at the medical file resting next to his hip, the undeniable biological proof that his masculinity was a complete fiction. And finally, he looked at me, the billionaire wife he threw away for absolute garbage. The realization was too heavy for his already damaged heart to bear. The extreme stress of public humiliation, sudden financial ruin, absolute betrayal by his own trusted family members, and the crushing destruction of his massive ego collided in a single catastrophic moment. Desmond's eyes rolled back into his head. His hands clawed desperately at his throat as a massive, agonizing spasm ripped through his chest. He let out a horrifying wet gasp, arching his back completely off the mattress, as the second fatal heart attack struck him with the unstoppable force of a freight train. The heart monitor let out a solid, continuous, piercing shriek. A flatline. Code Blue! We need a crash cart in here right now! A nurse screamed from the hallway, shoving Caleb roughly out of the way as she sprinted into the suite. Suddenly, the room was swarming with highly trained medical personnel. Doctors flooded through the heavy doors, pushing a hysterical Jasmine aside as they surrounded Desmond's bed. They ripped open his hospital gown, shouting urgent medical orders over the deafening continuous sound of the flatlining monitor. Someone grabbed a defibrillator, charging the heavy paddles with a loud mechanical whine. Clear! The lead doctor shouted, pressing the paddles firmly to Desmond's chest. His lifeless body jolted violently off the bed, slamming back down onto the sheets, but the green line on the monitor remained solid and unbroken. Tanya screamed in pure agony, pressing her hands against the glass of the observation window as hospital security forced her out into the hallway. Caleb stood frozen in terror, his mouth hanging open as he realized his selfish betrayal had triggered a fatal coronary. Jasmine curled into a tighter ball on the floor, covering her ears to block out the frantic sounds of the medical team, desperately trying to restart the heart of her dead meal ticket. I did not scream. I calmly stepped back, giving the doctors room to work. I smoothed the lapels of my coat, reaching down to zip my designer bag. I watched them charge the paddles again. I watched his lifeless body jolt. I watched the exhausted lead physician check his watch and call the time of death. His pathetic lies stopped his heart. He died exactly as he lived. The chaotic and noisy emergency room faded into a deafening silence. The physician stepped back and recorded the time of death. Desmond was finally gone forever. The man who had spent the last 12 years trying to make me feel small, inadequate, and utterly replaceable had just taken his final pathetic breath. I stood at the foot of the bed, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an unreadable mask of absolute calm. I did not shed a single tear. I did not collapse into the arms of the nurses. I simply observed the lifeless shell of the man who had just tried to steal my entire empire. He gambled everything on a foolish lie, and he paid the ultimate price. The reality of the situation crashed over the remaining occupants of the room like a tidal wave of ice water. Tanya let out a piercing guttural wail, throwing herself against the glass observation window. Caleb stood frozen in the corner, his bruised face completely drained of color as he stared at the dead body of his brother-in-law. Jasmine remained curled on the linoleum floor, her mascara-stained tears pooling beneath her cheeks as she realized her luxurious meal ticket had just expired permanently. They were all waiting for me to react, to play the role of the devastated widow. I refused to give them that satisfaction. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice cutting through the thick, oppressive silence of the medical suite, please have your security team escort these 3 individuals off the hospital premises immediately. They are no longer permitted to be anywhere near me. Tanya whipped her head around her tear-streaked face, twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Are you insane? My brother just died. You cannot kick me out of here. I am his blood. I am his family. You are the reason he is dead. You killed him with your wicked lies. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my hysterical sister-in-law. I did not raise my voice, but the dangerous edge in my tone made her instinctively step back. Your brother died because his heart was too weak to handle the monumental weight of his own deceit. And you are no longer family, Tanya. You lost that privilege the moment you stood in this room and cheered for my downfall. You cheered for a pregnant mistress. You cheered for my eviction. Now, you get to deal with the spectacular consequences of your own vicious behavior. Get out of my sight before I have you arrested for trespassing. One of my towering private security guards stepped forward, placing a firm, uncompromising hand on Tanya's shoulder. She tried to shrug him off, but the guard easily guided her toward the heavy double doors. Caleb, desperate to save whatever scraps of dignity he had left, tried to follow his wife, reaching out a trembling hand toward her. Tanya, wait. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out what to do, Caleb pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. Tanya spun around and delivered a vicious, echoing slap across his already bruised face. Do not ever speak to me again. You disgust me. I am calling a divorce lawyer the second I leave this building. The security guards swiftly separated the warring couple, marching Caleb down the left corridor and Tanya down the right. That left only Jasmine. The young, naive girl slowly pushed herself off the floor, clutching her pregnant stomach, as if it could somehow shield her from the incoming storm. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, silently begging for a mercy she did not deserve. I have nowhere to go, Jasmine whispered, her lower lip trembling uncontrollably. Desmond told me to quit my job at the reception desk. He told me he was going to take care of me forever. I do not even have money for a taxi. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. You should have thought about the logistics of your future before you decided to mock a woman's infertility. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your cheap clothes and vacate my midtown townhouse. If you are not gone by tomorrow afternoon, the police will forcibly remove you. Now get out. The second security guard escorted a sobbing Jasmine out of the suite, leaving me completely alone with Mr. Sterling and the medical staff. The doctors quietly arranged for Desmond's body to be transported to the morgue. I did not linger to watch. I had an empire to secure. I walked out of the hospital, the warm Atlanta sun hitting my face as I approached my waiting luxury SUV. I pulled out my phone and immediately called the executive branch of my primary banking institution. The wealth management director answered on the first ring. This is Kendra Vance. I stated, my tone strictly business. I need to report the death of my husband, Desmond Vance. I am authorizing the immediate cancellation of all his secondary credit cards, corporate expense accounts, and joint checking access. Freeze everything attached to his social security number. Do not allow a single unauthorized transaction to process. The bank manager complied instantly. With the financial arteries securely severed, I turned my attention to the physical properties. I instructed my driver to take me directly to the central security hub of Apex Heritage Holdings. During the short ride, I coordinated with my lead security director, dispatching specialized locksmith teams to every single property in my portfolio. I want the locks changed on the Buckhead estate, the lake property, and the commercial lots, I ordered through the secure speakerphone connection. Deactivate all of Caleb's master key fobs and clear his stored biometric data from the main servers. He is no longer authorized to access any building under our management umbrella. If his vehicle approaches any of the gates, call the local law enforcement authorities immediately. We are permanently locking all of them out of my properties today. I ended the call and leaned back against the plush seat of my SUV. The engine purred quietly as my driver navigated the bustling Atlanta streets. I watched the city fly by through the tinted windows, feeling a profound sense of detachment. The man I had spent a decade building up was lying in a hospital morgue, but my mind was entirely focused on protecting the assets I had worked so hard to acquire. I knew the storm was far from over. In our community, the death of a prominent figure like Desmond would spread faster than a wildfire. And in a family as toxic and entitled as his, the blame would inevitably be pointed directly at me. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting behind the massive mahogany desk in the executive suite of Apex Heritage Holdings. I had spent the entire night auditing the company accounts alongside Mr. Sterling. We were ensuring that Caleb had not left any financial booby traps before his access was revoked. Just as I was signing the final authorization to freeze a secondary escrow account, the heavy glass doors of the lobby burst open. I could hear the commotion all the way down the hall. My security guard radioed my desk phone. "Ms. Vance, your mother-in-law is here. She has several family members with her, and she is demanding to see you immediately. Should I escort them out?" "No," I replied smoothly, closing the financial ledger. "Send her in. It is time we had a little chat." The office doors flew open. Desmond's mother, Vivian, marched into the room like a general leading an invading army. She was dressed in head-to-toe black mourning attire, clutching a lace handkerchief. Tanya trailed closely behind her, her face puffy and red from crying. Three of Desmond's uncles flanked them, puffing out their chests in a pathetic display of masculine intimidation. Vivian stopped right in front of my desk, her eyes blazing with a mixture of profound grief and absolute, unadulterated hatred. "You killed my son!" Vivian shrieked, slamming her hands down on the polished mahogany wood. "You walked into that hospital room and stressed my baby boy until his heart gave out. You murdered him with your greed, Kendra. And now you have the audacity to sit in his office behind his desk like you accomplished something." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I calmly folded my hands together and looked at the woman who had spent 12 years questioning my womanhood. "This is my office, Vivian," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "This is my desk. This is my building. Your son died because he tried to steal my wealth to fund his illicit affairs. His heart failed because he was a coward who could not face the consequences of his own actions." "Lies," Tanya yelled from the back of the group, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Desmond was a good man. He provided for you. He gave you a lifestyle you could never achieve on your own." "Tanya," I said, narrowing my eyes, "need I remind you that your husband is the one who got Desmond's mistress pregnant? You should be at home packing Caleb's bags right now, not standing in my office defending a brother who let your husband sleep with his girlfriend." The uncles gasped, looking at Tanya in utter shock. Vivian quickly raised her hand to silence the room, desperate to regain control of the narrative. She pulled a thick itemized folder from her black purse and dropped it onto my desk. "I am not here to argue with a bitter woman," Vivian stated, lifting her chin arrogantly. "Desmond was a pillar of our church. He was a respected leader in Atlanta. I have already contacted the funeral home. We are doing a premium memorial service at First Baptist. We need a horse-drawn carriage, imported lilies, a solid mahogany casket, and a catered reception for 500 guests. The total estimate is $75,000. I expect you to wire the funds to the funeral director by noon today. It is your ultimate duty as his loyal wife." I looked at the ridiculous, overpriced invoice sitting on my desk. I slowly picked it up, examined the outrageous numbers, and then deliberately dropped it straight into the paper shredder beside my chair. The loud grinding noise filled the room as Vivian's extravagant funeral plans were sliced into tiny, worthless ribbons. "What are you doing?" Vivian screamed, her jaw dropping in horror. "That is your husband's homegoing service." "Desmond made his final wishes very clear yesterday afternoon," I replied, standing up so I could look down at her. "While he was lying on his deathbed, he explicitly stated that he wanted to leave all of his wealth, his legacy, and his entire future to his 23-year-old mistress. He wanted Jasmine to have the houses, the money, and the royal treatment. He was absolutely determined to build his bloodline with her." I walked around the desk, stopping mere inches from Vivian's shocked face. "So if Jasmine is the one carrying his precious legacy, then Jasmine can carry the heavy financial burden of putting him in the ground. You can take this invoice right over to the budget motel where she is currently staying and ask her to pay for the horse-drawn carriage. I am not spending a single penny of my hard-earned wealth to bury a man who hated me. You cannot do this, Vivian gasped, clutching her chest as if she were about to faint. The church will turn their backs on you. The entire community will know you abandoned your husband in death. You will be a complete outcast. Let them talk, I said, completely unbothered by her cheap emotional blackmail. I stopped caring about the opinions of this hypocritical community the moment I realized they valued the appearance of a marriage over my actual sanity. Desmond wanted to play the role of the generous sugar daddy. Now you all get to figure out how to pay for a $75,000 funeral on a $0 budget. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Security, please escort these guests out of the building. They are trespassing on private corporate property, and they are never to be granted access again. You will burn for this, Kendra, Vivian wailed as the guards grabbed her arms and guided her toward the glass doors. You will lose everything. I already won, I called out as they dragged her away. Have a wonderful time at the funeral, Vivian. The fallout from Vivian's shredded $75,000 invoice was spectacularly swift and incredibly public. Without my limitless bank accounts to fund her delusions of grandeur, Desmond's grand homegoing was reduced to a stunningly basic affair that became the immediate scandal of our affluent congregation. Because Jasmine was utterly broke and terrified of my legal team, she never answered Vivian's frantic phone calls. Left with no other options, Vivian and her brothers had to scrape together their own depleted savings. There was no imported mahogany casket. Desmond was laid to rest in a standard veneer finish coffin. There was no horse-drawn carriage or police escort through downtown Atlanta. Instead of a catered reception for 500 elite guests at the country club, they held a modest, tense gathering in the church basement with cheap sandwiches and watered-down punch. Naturally, the whispers among the church ladies were deafening. I did not attend. I spent that Saturday morning at a luxury spa in Buckhead, enjoying a 90-minute deep tissue massage while my phone remained securely turned off. My absence spoke volumes, sending a shockwave through the community that Desmond Vance's widow had completely washed her hands of him. The head pastor, a man who had long benefited from Desmond's loud, boastful tithing money that actually came from my trust, attempted to call my office the following Monday. He left a lengthy, guilt-tripping voicemail about forgiveness, wifely duties, and honoring the dead. I did not return his call. I instructed my accountant to permanently cancel the massive monthly automated donation I had been silently sending to the church's building fund for the last 8 years. Let the pastor see exactly whose invisible hand had been keeping the lights on in his sanctuary. Within 48 hours, the sympathetic tone of the community shifted violently. The realization dawned on everyone that Desmond was not the wealthy benefactor they all worshipped. He was a hollow fraud. The social exile Vivian had so confidently threatened me with backfired, completely swallowing her whole. While Vivian was busy planning a funeral she could no longer afford, Caleb was experiencing a completely different type of absolute destruction. Tanya did not just ask her cheating husband to leave their marital home. She orchestrated a public spectacle that the entire affluent neighborhood would gossip about for the next decade. When Caleb arrived at their house later that afternoon, desperately hoping to manipulate his wife into forgiving him, he found his entire life scattered across the front lawn. Tanya had thrown his custom-tailored suits, his expensive golf clubs, and his prized collection of vintage watches directly onto the wet grass. She was standing on the front porch with a baseball bat in her hands, flanked by 2 of her massive cousins who had rushed over the moment they heard the scandalous news. Caleb tried to step onto the driveway, but Tanya raised the bat, her eyes filled with a terrifying, unhinged rage. If you take one more step toward my house, Caleb, I will smash your skull just like you smashed our marriage, Tanya screamed, her voice echoing down the manicured suburban street. You slept with my brother's pregnant mistress. You humiliated me in front of Kendra. My lawyer has already frozen our joint bank accounts. You have absolutely nothing. Caleb panicked, pulling out his smartphone to check his banking app. His face drained of color as the bright red zeros confirmed his worst fear. Tanya had transferred every single dime of their liquid assets into a private account. Combined with my dissolution of Desmond Properties LLC, Caleb was completely, undeniably destitute. He had no job, no wife, no home, and zero access to cash. He gathered a few damp shirts from the grass, threw them into the trunk of his car, and drove away like a beaten dog. But Caleb was not the only one desperately clinging to a dying illusion. The official summons arrived shortly after the funeral. Vivian and Tanya were absolutely refusing to accept their crushing defeat. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law still believed they were entitled to the fruits of my labor. They demanded a formal reading of the estate, clinging to the delusion that Desmond's 12-year marriage somehow guaranteed them a massive financial payout. I instructed Mr. Sterling to host them in his downtown corporate law firm. I wanted to look them in the eyes when I legally dismantled the very last shred of their arrogant entitlement. I sat at the head of the massive glass table, sipping sparkling water. Mr. Sterling stood quietly by the window, a thick stack of legal documents resting before him. At 10 o'clock, the mahogany doors swung open. Vivian marched in wearing the same dramatic black morning dress she had paraded around the church. Tanya followed closely behind, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent room. They had brought a man with them. He wore a poorly tailored pinstripe suit and carried a scuffed briefcase. I recognized him from the tacky billboards plastered along the interstate highways. His name was Reginald Thorne, a bottom-feeding personal injury lawyer who specialized in loud threats and quick settlements. Reginald slammed his briefcase onto the glass table, puffing out his chest as he attempted to intimidate Mr. Sterling. "Let us skip the pleasantries," Reginald barked, pointing a thick finger in my direction. "My clients are the immediate blood relatives of the late Desmond Vance. You claim Desmond did not own the 6 luxury properties, but he was legally married to this woman for 12 years. Under the laws of marital property, any wealth acquired during the union is subject to equitable division. We are formally contesting the ownership of Apex Heritage Holdings. We demand 50% of the entire real estate portfolio, immediate access to the corporate bank accounts, and the physical keys to the Buckhead estate today." Vivian crossed her arms, a smug, victorious smile spreading across her wrinkled face. "You cannot hide behind a fake trust, Kendra. My son built that marriage, and we are taking back what belongs to his family." I set my glass down, the soft clink echoing loudly in the tense room. I looked directly at Tanya. "Tanya," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Do you remember my bridal shower 12 years ago? You sneaked into the back bedroom and tried to steal the diamond earrings my grandmother gave me. When I caught you, you claimed you were just trying them on. You have spent your entire life trying to slip your hands into pockets that do not belong to you. Your brother was a fraud. Your husband is currently sleeping in a rusted pickup truck because you threw him out. And yet here you are, still trying to steal my diamonds." Tanya's face flushed a deep red, but before she could scream a response, Mr. Sterling stepped forward. He simply opened his pristine legal folder. "Mr. Thorne," Mr. Sterling addressed the sweaty billboard lawyer, "did your clients bother to inform you about the prenuptial agreement signed 12 years ago?" Reginald blinked, his aggressive posture faltering instantly. "Prenup? What prenup?" "The one Desmond demanded I sign," I explained, leaning back in my leather chair. "When we got engaged, Desmond was terrified that a girl from the South Side would eventually try to steal the imaginary wealth he was projecting. He hired a cheap lawyer to draft an ironclad prenuptial agreement stating that any assets held in blind trusts, separate management companies, or individual accounts would remain 100% separate property in the event of death or divorce. I thought he was protecting his non-existent millions from me. He actually ended up protecting my massive empire from him." Mr. Sterling slid a certified copy of the 12-year-old prenuptial agreement across the glass table. Reginald snatched it up, his eyes scanning the dense legal paragraphs. His face drained of color as he realized the document was completely bulletproof. "Furthermore," Mr. Sterling continued, his voice dropping into a lethal professional register, "Apex Heritage Holdings is registered in South Dakota, a jurisdiction that shields blind trusts from out-of-state marital property claims. Desmond Vance was legally classified as an independent contractor. He was merely an employee of Kendra's trust. He received a monthly salary for his property management services, which he immediately squandered on luxury cars and hotel rooms for his mistress. He had zero equity, he had zero ownership, he had zero marital claim to the assets. Vivian slammed her hands against the table, her eyes wide with mounting panic. That is impossible. My son was the chief executive officer. You are twisting the law. Reginald, do something, threatened to sue them. Reginald slowly lowered the prenuptial agreement. He looked at the flawless legal documents, then looked at the aggressive, greedy women who had hired him. He realized with crushing certainty that he had taken this case on a contingency fee basis. There would be no massive settlement. There would be no legal battle. There would be absolutely no money. I cannot do anything, Reginald muttered hastily, shoving the paperwork back into his briefcase. The trust structure is impenetrable. The prenup waives all rights to equitable division. He was legally just an employee. Reginald, where are you going? Tanya shrieked as the lawyer snapped his briefcase shut and practically ran toward the heavy doors. I am leaving, Reginald shot back. You lied to me. This case is dead. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Vivian and Tanya completely alone in the expansive conference room. The illusion they had clung to evaporated. They stood frozen, entirely humiliated by their own staggering ignorance. You see, Vivian, I said softly, rising from my chair. Desmond spent his life trying to outsmart everyone. His arrogance was his downfall. You walked in here expecting a multi-million-dollar payout, but you are walking out with the exact same thing your son left you, absolutely nothing. The heavy oak doors of the conference room clicked shut securely, leaving only the bitter stench of Vivian's shattered entitlement lingering in the cold air. I did not waste a single second celebrating my swift legal victory over my delusional in-laws. There was absolutely no time for a victory lap. I turned directly to Mr. Sterling, signaling for him to bring out the heavy cardboard financial boxes we had transported from Desmond's former management office. We had a massive, chaotic financial mess to untangle. Desmond Properties LLC was merely a management shell, but it handled the daily operational cash flow, including maintenance budgets and tenant security deposits. I instructed my elite forensic accounting team to rip through every single digital ledger, scanned receipt, and bank transfer authorized over the past 5 years. They worked through the entire weekend, and what they uncovered was nothing short of financially grotesque. Mr. Sterling spread the printed spreadsheets across the pristine glass table. The numbers were highlighted in bright, glaring red ink. Desmond and Caleb had not just been mismanaging my properties, they had been actively, maliciously embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars. The intricate scheme was breathtakingly arrogant and incredibly sloppy. Whenever a new luxury tenant moved into the midtown townhouses or the commercial lots, they were required to pay a hefty security deposit. By law, those specific funds were supposed to sit untouched in a secure interest-bearing escrow account. Instead, Caleb had been routinely forging maintenance invoices from his own failing contracting business. He would submit a fake bill for phantom plumbing repairs or imaginary roof inspections. Desmond would then authorize the payment, draining the tenant escrow accounts directly into Caleb's private business checking account. They were using stolen tenant money to fund Caleb's massive gambling debts and Desmond's lavish secret vacations with Jasmine. My blood boiled as I stared at the irrefutable paper trail of their blatant thievery. Caleb had signed over 40 fraudulent work orders in the last 3 years alone. He was a licensed general contractor in the state of Georgia, which meant his signature on these documents was not just a simple breach of trust. It was a severe, undeniable felony. I immediately picked up my smartphone and ordered my private security director to locate my disgraced brother-in-law. Since Tanya had publicly thrown him out of their suburban home days ago, Caleb was currently living out of his rusted pickup truck. It took my security team less than 2 hours to find him sleeping in a discount retail parking lot. They gently but firmly escorted him directly to my corporate headquarters. Caleb was dragged into the conference room looking like a pathetic cornered rat. His designer clothes were wrinkled and stained, his face covered in dark, unkempt stubble. He shrank back when he saw me sitting at the head of the long glass table, flanked by Mr. Sterling and 2 towering security guards. Caleb collapsed into a leather chair, his hands trembling violently as he braced himself for another brutal confrontation. I did not offer him a glass of water. I simply slid the thick stack of highlighted fraudulent maintenance invoices straight across the smooth glass surface. Caleb glanced down at the papers, and all the remaining color instantly drained from his bruised face. He recognized his own forged signatures immediately. "You have a very serious problem, Caleb," I said, my voice razor-sharp and completely devoid of mercy. "My forensic accountants just finished a comprehensive audit of Desmond Properties LLC. We found exactly $450,000 missing from the tenant escrow accounts. And every single missing dollar leads directly to your personal business accounts through these completely fabricated contracting invoices." Caleb began to shake his head frantically, sweat pouring down his pale forehead. "Kendra, you have to listen to me. I did not want to do it. Desmond made me. He told me the money belonged to him anyway. He said he needed the cash to keep Jasmine quiet and pay for her luxury apartment. I was just following the orders of the chief executive officer. You cannot blame me for this." I slammed my open palm against the glass table, making him jump out of his seat. "Do not ever try to insult my intelligence, Caleb. You are a state-licensed general contractor. You knew exactly what you were doing when you drafted these fake invoices. You knowingly conspired to commit wire fraud and grand larceny. You stole from innocent tenants to fund your pathetic, miserable existence." Caleb covered his face with his dirty hands, sobbing loudly in the center of the immaculate boardroom. "Please do not call the police, Kendra. I have absolutely nothing left. Tanya took my house. My bank accounts are frozen. If you send me to prison, my life is completely over. I will do anything you want. Please, I am begging you." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the broken, weeping man who used to mock my South Side upbringing. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Caleb. Your life as a respected businessman is completely over. Before you arrived here today, my corporate legal team forwarded this entire packet of fraudulent invoices directly to the Georgia State Licensing Board. They have already initiated an emergency review. Your professional contracting license is being permanently and irrevocably revoked as we speak. You will never legally swing a hammer or sign a building permit in this state ever again." Caleb gasped, clutching his chest, as if he had been physically shot. His entire livelihood, his only legitimate means of making money, was gone in an instant. I slid a typed, legally binding confession across the table, along with a black ink pen. "Sign this full confession admitting your role in the embezzlement scheme. If you refuse, Mr. Sterling will hand this file over to the district attorney for federal prosecution right now." Caleb snatched the pen and signed his name through his heavy tears, sealing his own total destruction completely. I signaled for my security guards to escort the weeping contractor out the service elevator. I wanted him out of my sight and permanently removed from my building. I instructed Mr. Sterling to file the confession with the district attorney immediately. I had successfully excised the financial rot from my corporate infrastructure, but Caleb was not the type of man to simply accept defeat gracefully. He was arrogant, entitled, and now pushed to the absolute brink. Stripped of his contracting license, homeless, and facing an imminent federal indictment for embezzlement, his desperation quickly morphed into a dangerously stupid idea. As night fell over Atlanta, he remembered the hidden floor safe in the basement office of my commercial complex on the east side of the city. Desmond used to keep a massive emergency cash reserve in that safe. Caleb was absolutely certain that at least $50,000 was sitting in that heavy steel box right now. What Caleb failed to realize was that when I ordered my security team to lock down the properties, I did not just change the physical deadbolts. I upgraded the entire digital surveillance infrastructure. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, my customized tablet chimed softly on my nightstand. I was sitting up in bed, sipping a hot cup of chamomile tea, reviewing the financial projections for my next business acquisition. I picked up the glowing tablet and tapped the security notification. A crisp, high-definition infrared video feed popped onto the screen. It was Caleb. He was creeping through the back alley of the commercial complex, dressed entirely in dark clothing, carrying a heavy crowbar and a duffel bag. He looked like a pathetic amateur burglar straight out of a cheap movie. I watched in mild amusement as he approached the reinforced steel service door. He tried to use his old master keycard, swiping it frantically against the digital reader. The small light flashed an angry bright red. Access denied. Frustrated and sweating profusely, Caleb raised the crowbar and smashed it violently against the electronic locking mechanism. He grunted with exertion, swinging the heavy metal bar again and again until the plastic casing shattered into pieces. He wedged the crowbar into the doorframe, throwing his entire body weight against it until the heavy door finally popped open with a loud metallic screech. He slipped inside the dark building, completely unaware that multiple hidden cameras were tracking his every single movement. I calmly picked up my phone and dialed the local police precinct. I identified myself as the owner of the commercial property, provided my security credentials, and reported an active break-in. I requested multiple officers be dispatched immediately. Then I sat back against my plush pillows and watched the live feed with profound satisfaction. Caleb hurried down the basement stairs, his flashlight beam bouncing erratically against the concrete walls. He reached the back office, shoved the heavy desk aside, and dropped to his knees in front of the hidden floor safe. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, frantically spinning the combination dial. He inputted the numbers perfectly, pulled the heavy handle, and threw the safe door wide open. He let out a loud, victorious laugh, reaching his greedy hands inside the dark vault. But his laughter died instantly in his throat. He pulled his hands out, staring at them in utter disbelief. The safe was completely empty. I had dispatched my wealth management team to empty that exact safe 12 hours ago. I knew Caleb was a desperate, opportunistic thief, and I was not about to leave a single dollar bill lying around for him to steal. Caleb slammed his fists against the concrete floor, screaming in frustration. He grabbed his duffel bag to leave, but suddenly the basement was flooded with blinding, intense white light. 3 police officers stood at the top of the stairs, weapons drawn, and pointed directly at the bruised, sweating intruder. "Atlanta Police, drop the bag and put your hands on your head right now," the lead officer shouted, his voice echoing loudly in the cramped basement space. Caleb scrambled to his feet, raising his hands in sheer panic, realizing his pathetic life was officially over for good today. As the police officers forcefully wrestled Caleb's arms behind his back, the sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the live audio feed on my tablet. I watched, utterly fascinated by the rapid dissolution of a man's ego. Caleb was babbling incoherently, throwing out my name, Desmond's name, and wild, desperate accusations of a setup. He tried to claim he was the property manager authorized to be there, but the shattered electronic lock and the heavy crowbar lying next to his duffel bag told the indisputable truth. The lead officer simply read him his Miranda rights, his stern, uncompromising voice, cutting effortlessly through Caleb's hysterical, high-pitched sobbing. I picked up my phone and dialed the precinct captain. I calmly informed him that my corporate legal team would be submitting a comprehensive digital evidence packet by dawn. This would include the forged master key logs, the infrared footage, and the historical audit of Caleb's previous embezzlements to establish a clear pattern of financial criminality. I made it explicitly clear that Apex Heritage Holdings would not offer any leniency, nor would we support any bail recommendations. I wanted the maximum possible charges pressed: felony breaking and entering, attempted grand larceny, and malicious destruction of commercial property. The next morning, a profound stillness settled over my estate. I sat in my sunlit kitchen, drinking a freshly brewed espresso, watching the morning news on the television. The local anchor briefly mentioned a foiled late-night burglary at a prominent East Side commercial complex. They had not released Caleb's name pending formal arraignment, but the details were specific enough. I knew that the exact moment Tanya saw that vague headline over her morning coffee, she would instinctively know her disgraced homeless husband had officially hit absolute rock bottom. The men who had spent a decade trying to systematically diminish my light, quietly draining my resources while mocking my quiet nature, were now either lying in a refrigerated morgue drawer or shivering in a sterile concrete holding cell. The chessboard was almost completely cleared, but the universe was not finished delivering the consequences of Desmond's choices to my doorstep. That very afternoon, my intercom buzzed softly, interrupting a conference call I was having with a commercial development team. My lead receptionist sounded incredibly uncomfortable. She informed me that a young woman was causing a frantic scene in the main lobby, loudly refusing to leave until she spoke directly to me. I knew exactly who it was before the receptionist even finished describing the girl's tear-streaked face and noticeably pregnant belly. I authorized my security team to bring her up to the executive floor, genuinely curious to see how quickly youthful arrogance could curdle into absolute panic. The mahogany doors opened, and Jasmine stumbled into my pristine office. The physical transformation was staggering. Just days ago in that sterile hospital suite, she had been a triumphant mistress, wrapped tightly in expensive designer labels Desmond purchased with my stolen money. She had rubbed her stomach and mocked my empty womb with unapologetic glee. Today she looked like a terrified, exhausted child. Her silk blouse was wrinkled, her heavy makeup was smeared in dark circles under bloodshot eyes, and she was clutching a cheap canvas duffel bag. Caleb abandoned her the exact second his own fraudulent world collapsed, leaving her to face the harsh reality of her terrible choices alone. "Kendra, please, you have to help me," Jasmine sobbed, collapsing heavily into the exact same leather guest chair Caleb had occupied the day before. "I have nowhere else to go. The police came to the Midtown townhouse yesterday afternoon and forced me to leave immediately. They locked all the doors and told me I was trespassing. I tried to call Caleb, but his phone is disconnected. I tried to go to his suburban house, but Tanya answered the door and threatened to attack me with a baseball bat." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, folding my hands elegantly on the pristine glass table. I did not offer her a tissue or a glass of water. "I am struggling to understand why any of this is my concern, Jasmine. You were given a legally binding eviction notice. You chose to ignore it, so my security division followed standard protocol. As for Caleb, you enthusiastically decided to sleep with a married man who was actively stealing from my business to fund your lavish lifestyle. You willingly attached yourself to a financial parasite, and now you are experiencing the devastating crash." Jasmine began to weep louder, clutching her pregnant stomach defensively. "But I am carrying a child. You cannot just throw a vulnerable pregnant woman out onto the cold street." Desmond promised he was going to take care of me forever. He promised me a life of luxury and endless wealth. I do not have a job because he specifically told me to quit. My parents will not take me in because I brought severe shame on them at our church. You have millions of dollars, Kendra. Please, just let me stay in one of the tiny guest rooms at the Buckhead estate until I can get back on my feet. The sheer audacity required to make such an offensive request was mathematically impressive. She sat in my office begging to live rent-free in my luxury estate, completely oblivious to the magnitude of her own cruelty. "Jasmine," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that made her dramatic sobs hitch violently in her throat. "Do you remember what you said to me in that hospital room? Do you remember looking me directly in the eye and telling me I was a beaten woman who needed to pack my bags tonight? You paraded your fertility like a loaded weapon, intending to inflict maximum emotional damage on a loyal wife who had spent a decade silently grieving her empty nursery." Jasmine's face drained of all remaining color. She shrank back into the deep leather chair, trembling violently as the painful memory of her own vicious arrogance was thrown right back at her. "I was saying what Desmond told me to say. I was scared." "You were incredibly cruel," I corrected her sharply. "You thoroughly enjoyed inflicting pain because you thought you were wearing an impenetrable golden crown. But that crown was bought with my money, and I have aggressively reclaimed every single stolen jewel. You eagerly participated in the betrayal of my marriage, you mocked my profound personal pain, and you conspired to steal my hard-earned assets. I do not owe you a single shred of human compassion." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small white card. I slid it across the glass table toward her trembling hands. Jasmine looked down at it, her eyes widening in panic. "What is this?" she whispered. "It is the address and phone number of the Atlanta Women's Mission," I stated coldly. "It is a charitable shelter that provides safe housing and resources for displaced expectant mothers. They have hot meals, clean beds, and job placement programs. It is exactly the kind of reality check you desperately need right now." "A homeless shelter!" Jasmine shrieked. "You are sending me to a homeless shelter. I am supposed to be a millionaire's wife." "You were never going to be a millionaire's wife," I said, pressing the silver security intercom button on my massive desk. You were just a temporary, meaningless distraction for a broke, sterile man and his thieving, pathetic brother-in-law. Jasmine stumbled out of my corporate office, clutching the shelter address like a lifeline. Her tearful exit marked the end of her pathetic fantasy. I instructed my security desk to permanently revoke her visitor access and return to my financial projections. I later received a brief, highly satisfying report from my security director regarding Jasmine's transition into her new reality. The young woman who had haughtily demanded the keys to my Buckhead estate had caused a massive tearful scene at the homeless shelter's intake desk. She tried to leverage her non-existent status, screaming at the overworked volunteers that she was carrying a millionaire's baby and demanding a private VIP room. The shelter staff, hardened by the brutal realities of urban poverty, were entirely unimpressed by her designer handbag and her hysterical sense of entitlement. She was assigned a standard cot in a communal dormitory alongside dozens of other women who were fighting genuine battles for survival. Within a week, the luxurious mirage she had sacrificed her dignity for evaporated completely. Stripped of the stolen money, the fancy townhouse, and the arrogant married man who used her as a biological pawn, Jasmine was forced into the exact life she had built for herself. I felt no guilt. Women who eagerly conspire to tear down other women for the fleeting attention of a toxic man eventually learn that the patriarchy they serve will always discard them the second they cease to be useful. She gambled on a broken horse and she lost everything. The swift removal of my late husband's mistress provided a brief, satisfying silence, but the domino effect of dissolving Desmond Properties LLC was far from over. It took exactly 48 hours for Desmond's mother to realize the catastrophic reality of her own living situation. For the past 8 years, Vivian resided in a sprawling 5-bedroom brick estate in Alpharetta. Desmond famously presented her with the keys during a lavish catered Mother's Day banquet at our church, tearfully proclaiming that a good son always provides a castle for his queen. The congregation clapped, the pastor praised his filial piety, and Vivian spent every Sunday since bragging about her son's unmatched generosity. She proudly hosted weekly Bible study groups in her gourmet kitchen, constantly looking down her nose at the other women whose children could not afford to buy them luxury real estate. What Desmond conveniently failed to mention to his adoring mother was the actual origin of the funds used to purchase that Alpharetta estate. He used a massive capital injection from Apex Heritage Holdings to secure the property in cash. The house did not belong to Desmond, and it certainly did not belong to Vivian. It was a corporate asset fully owned and controlled by my blind trust. When my wealth management team legally absorbed the LLC assets, they systematically audited the deeds. Vivian's house was flagged immediately. My legal department sent an automated letter to the residents officially notifying the current occupant of the transfer of ownership and requesting immediate contact regarding tenancy status. My private office line rang at exactly 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. I recognized Vivian's personal cell phone number flashing on the caller ID. I let it ring 3 times before calmly pressing the speaker button. "Kendra, my beautiful daughter," Vivian sang through the phone, her voice dripping with an artificial, sickeningly sweet warmth that made my skin crawl. "How are you holding up, sweetheart? I have been praying for your healing every single night." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my glass desk. "You were praying for me to burn in hell while your security guards dragged you out of my lobby last week, Vivian. Skip the fake pleasantries. Why are you calling my corporate office?" Vivian let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, desperately trying to maintain her friendly facade. "Oh, Kendra, you know how grief twists the mind. I was just so distraught over losing my baby boy. I said things I absolutely did not mean. You are my family. You have always been the daughter I never had. I am calling because I received a very confusing, mixed-up letter in the mail today. It looks like some sort of clerical error from a management company regarding the deed to my house. I just need you to call them and clear up this silly mistake." "There is no mistake, Vivian," I replied sharply, pulling up her property file on my monitor. "Desmond never owned your house. He used my corporate trust funds to buy that property 8 years ago. You have been living rent-free in a house I fully own. Since Desmond is no longer employed by my trust, his unauthorized charity program is officially terminated. The sickening sweetness instantly vanished from Vivian's voice, replaced by a trembling, breathless panic. Kendra, please, you cannot do this to me. I am an elderly widow. I hosted Desmond's childhood friends in this house. I have my garden out back. You have millions of dollars and an entire real estate empire. You do not need this one house. Give me the deed. I do not owe you a deed, and I certainly do not owe you charity, I stated coldly. For 12 years you sat at my dinner table and actively prayed for God to fix my broken womb. You encouraged your son to seek validation outside of our marriage. You demanded I wire you $75,000 for a horse-drawn carriage while standing in the very office you are now begging for mercy from. Your entitlement is staggering. I am begging you, Kendra. Vivian sobbed loudly into the receiver. My entire social circle lives in this neighborhood. If you evict me, I will have to move into a tiny rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. The humiliation will literally kill me. I will do anything you want. Please, I am asking for your forgiveness. I listened to the desperate weeping woman who spent a decade questioning my worth. I did not feel a single ounce of pity, but I did see a perfect opportunity to establish a permanent, undeniable boundary. I am not going to evict you, Vivian, I said, my voice completely emotionless. Vivian gasped, letting out a cry of relief. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Kendra. I knew you had a good heart. Do not thank me yet, I interrupted harshly. You are not getting evicted, but you are no longer a freeloader. You are now a tenant. My legal team has drafted a standard month-to-month residential lease agreement. The fair market rental value for a 5-bedroom estate in Alpharetta is currently $4,500 a month. You will pay that exact amount directly to Apex Heritage Holdings on the first day of every single month. $4,500! Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking in pure horror. Kendra, I live on a fixed pension. I only get $2,000 a month. I cannot afford that kind of rent. How am I supposed to survive? You will have to figure it out, I replied smoothly, checking my gold watch. You can get a part-time job. You can sell those expensive designer hats you bought with Desmond's embezzled money. You can ask the ladies at your Bible study for a monthly donation. I frankly do not care how you secure the funds. But if your rent is even one day late, my property managers will file an eviction notice, and the local sheriff will place your belongings on the curb. A courier is dropping the lease off at your front door in 10 minutes. Sign it or start packing your bags today. I pressed the button and disconnected the call, leaving Vivian to face the crushing, undeniable reality of her new life. She had demanded a legacy, and I had handed her a bill. The phone call with Vivian ended, and I barely had time to process the absolute silence of my office before my security detail alerted me to yet another unexpected visitor. It was Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Desmond collapsed in that hospital room. My head of security informed me that Tanya was standing in the ground floor lobby. She was not demanding to see me. She was not screaming or making a scene like her mother or her estranged husband. She was simply waiting by the reception desk, politely asking if I could spare 5 minutes of my time. I stared at the security monitor on my desk. Tanya looked entirely different. The haughty, aggressive woman who had proudly stood next to Caleb and demanded my house keys was completely gone. She was wearing a simple trench coat, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, her face devoid of the heavy, glamorous makeup she usually wore to our family dinners. I took a deep breath, tapped the intercom button, and instructed my guards to let her up. I did not have them escort her to the boardroom this time. I had them bring her directly into my private office. I wanted this conversation to be intimate, quiet, and absolutely final. The heavy mahogany doors opened, and Tanya walked in slowly. She did not look at the expensive modern art on my walls or the sweeping view of the Atlanta skyline behind my desk. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were swollen and red, carrying the undeniable weight of a woman whose entire reality had been violently ripped apart in a matter of days. I gestured toward the leather guest chair across from my desk. She sat down carefully, clutching her leather purse in her lap, as if it were a life preserver. We sat in total silence for a long moment. I did not offer a greeting. I let her initiate the conversation, knowing that whatever she had to say needed to come out on her own terms. I am not here to ask for money, Kendra. Tanya said, her voice raspy and stripped of all its usual arrogance. I know my mother called you begging for a free house. I know Caleb tried to rob your commercial property. I know Desmond spent the last year of his life stealing from you to fund his mistress. I am not here to defend any of them. I am here because I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I was wrong. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. You were wrong about a lot of things, Tanya. Which specific transgression are we addressing today? Tanya swallowed hard, fresh tears welling in her eyes. All of it. For 12 years I treated you like an outsider. I let my mother make those horrible comments about your infertility, knowing how much it hurt you. I let Caleb make those disgusting racist jokes about your Southside background, and I just laughed along with him because it made me feel superior. I idolized Desmond. I thought my brother was a king, and I thought you were just lucky to be standing in his shadow. But the truth is, my family is a dark, rotting mess. Desmond was a monster who betrayed his vows. Caleb was a parasite who slept with my brother's mistress in a house you paid for. My entire life was a pathetic lie funded by your hard work. She wiped a single tear from her cheek. When I threw Caleb's clothes out on the lawn and kicked him out, I sat in my empty house and finally realized what you must have felt like every single day in our family. You were surrounded by people who were supposed to love and protect you, but we only used you. We mocked you while taking your money. We belittled you while living in the houses you bought. I am so incredibly sorry, Kendra. I am sorry for the stolen earrings at your bridal shower. I am sorry for the snide remarks at Thanksgiving. I am sorry for being a terrible relative and a terrible person. I listened to her confession without interrupting. I scrutinized her face, looking for any trace of manipulation, any hidden agenda, or desperate ploy for financial grace. I found nothing but raw, devastating honesty. The betrayal of her husband and the disgraceful death of her brother had finally shattered the toxic mirror she had been looking into for her entire life. Thank you for saying that, Tanya. I replied, my voice softening just a fraction. It takes a significant amount of courage to admit when you have been the villain in someone else's story. I accept your apology. Tanya let out a shake, her shoulders dropping in profound relief. Does this mean we can try to start over, maybe grab coffee sometime? I have lost my brother, my husband, and my mother is losing her mind. I do not have anyone left. No, Tanya, I said firmly but without malice. We are not going to grab coffee. We are not going to become friends, and we are certainly not going to pretend to be family. Accepting your apology does not mean I am inviting you back into my life. The damage your family inflicted on me over the past decade was deep and intentional. I am choosing to forgive you today because I refuse to carry the toxic baggage of the Vance family into my new chapter. Releasing my anger toward you is a gift I am giving to myself, not an invitation for you to stay. Tanya nodded slowly, fully understanding the strict, unyielding boundary I had just established between us today. She stood up from the leather chair, offered a final respectful nod, and quietly walked out. For the very first time, a family member walked away without trying to take something. I was free. With Tanya gone and the heavy office doors closed, the lingering ghost of the Vance family was finally banished from my corporate headquarters. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute quiet. But the silence was only a temporary luxury. I pressed the intercom button and instructed my executive assistant to summon my entire legal and public relations team to the main boardroom. It was time to permanently erase Desmond from my professional legacy. For 12 long years, I had allowed my hard work, my capital, and my brilliant financial strategies to be masked behind his booming voice and flashy tailored suits. Desmond Properties LLC was a toxic shell company that represented everything I had endured. It represented his arrogance, his secret betrayals, and the systemic embezzlement perpetrated by his brother-in-law. I walked into the boardroom and took my rightful place at the head of the glass table. File the dissolution paperwork immediately. I instructed Mr. Sterling, who had his pen poised over a legal pad. Desmond Properties LLC is officially dead as of this afternoon. I want every single sign removed from our commercial buildings. I want his name stripped from the residential leases, the corporate letterheads, and the banking accounts. We are completely rebranding. My head of public relations, a sharp woman named Simone, leaned forward with a notepad. What is the new name for the operational division, Kendra? Do we fold it entirely under Apex Heritage Holdings? No, I replied smoothly. Apex is the blind trust. That remains my private financial shield. The public-facing real estate and development firm will be named after the woman who actually built it. We are launching Hayes Development Group today using my maiden name. I am taking my identity back. The room buzzed with immediate focused energy. My team sprang into action coordinating graphic designers, legal clerks, and building managers. But I was not just changing a logo on a glass door. I wanted to transform the entire purpose of my wealth. For over a decade, my resources had been secretly drained to fund the selfish, destructive fantasies of an insecure man. Now those resources were going to be aggressively redirected toward people who actually deserved them. We are launching a new commercial and residential initiative under Hayes Development Group, I announced to the room. It is going to be aimed specifically at empowering independent women of color across the greater Atlanta area. I want to allocate $50 million from our liquid capital to create commercial grants, affordable luxury housing, and subsidized retail spaces for female entrepreneurs. I want women who are starting their own businesses, leaving toxic marriages, or building their own legacies to have a rock-solid foundation to stand on. Simone smiled broadly, aggressively typing notes into her tablet. That is an incredible narrative, Kendra. The press is going to absolutely devour this. A powerful, brilliant Black woman stepping out of the shadows to uplift her community after a sudden tragedy. We need to organize a formal press conference and a launch gala immediately. 3 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Atlanta was completely packed with journalists, local politicians, and the most influential business leaders in the state. I stood backstage wearing a flawless, tailored emerald green power suit. I did not have a loud, arrogant husband standing next to me trying to steal the microphone. I did not have a greedy mother-in-law sitting in the front row taking credit for my accomplishments. I stood entirely alone, and I had never felt more powerful. I walked out onto the brightly lit stage. The massive digital screens behind me displayed the sleek modern logo of Hayes Development Group. The applause was deafening. I stepped up to the acrylic podium looking out at the flashing cameras and the captivated audience. For 12 years, I operated silently behind the scenes of the Atlanta real estate market. I began, my voice ringing out clear and strong through the massive speakers. I allowed my vision and my capital to be managed under someone else's name. But recent events have profoundly reminded me that tomorrow is never guaranteed, and true legacies are not built by hiding in the shadows. Today I am proud to step forward as the sole founder and chief executive officer of Hayes Development Group. I outlined the $50 million initiative detailing the specific grants and commercial spaces we were providing to minority women. I spoke about the immense power of financial independence, the critical importance of airtight legal boundaries, and the absolute necessity of women claiming ownership of their own hard work. The room erupted into a standing ovation before I even finished my closing remarks. The media reaction. The following morning was explosive and overwhelmingly positive. My face was splashed across the front page of the Atlanta Business Chronicle. Forbes published a massive digital feature highlighting my strategic corporate restructuring and my philanthropic initiative. The narrative completely shifted. I was no longer the tragic grieving widow of a prominent community figure. I was finally recognized as the brilliant, ruthless mastermind who had been quietly running the entire empire all along. Respected local business owners, politicians, and community leaders flooded my executive office with floral arrangements, congratulatory emails, and requests for high-level meetings. Women from all over the city sent me handwritten letters thanking me for creating a corporate program that actually supported their ambitions instead of exploiting their labor. My inbox was overflowing with lucrative partnership offers and massive commercial development deals. By decisively cutting the dead weight of the Vance family and stepping into the blinding light of the public eye, I had tripled the social and financial value of my entire portfolio in less than a month. I had successfully turned a deeply humiliating personal betrayal into the greatest professional and community victory of my entire career. I proved my absolute dominance once and for all, cementing my legacy permanently, without anyone holding me back anymore. The weeks following my massive launch gala moved with blinding speed, but there was still one final piece of unfinished business waiting on my calendar. I had successfully dismantled Desmond's fraudulent legacy and secured my financial future, but true justice required absolute accountability. The criminal justice system had been processing the extensive evidence my legal team submitted regarding the systemic embezzlement scheme. Today was the day the gavel would finally fall. I instructed my driver to take me to the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta. I wanted a front row seat to watch the absolute destruction of the man who had actively conspired to steal my wealth. I stepped out of my sleek black town car, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and sharp stiletto heels. The crisp morning air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. I walked through the heavy security checkpoints of the federal courthouse with my head held high, flanked quietly by Mr. Sterling. We navigated the polished marble hallways until we reached the assigned courtroom on the fourth floor. I deliberately chose a seat in the second row of the gallery, positioning myself perfectly in the direct line of sight of the defendant's table. The large courtroom was mostly empty, completely devoid of the supportive family members who had once flocked to Caleb's defense. Tanya was absolutely nowhere to be found. She had finalized her rapid divorce proceedings a month ago and completely washed her hands of the man who had destroyed her family. Caleb was entirely alone. The heavy wooden side door opened, and two armed federal marshals escorted Caleb into the courtroom. The physical toll of his swift downfall was staggering to witness. He was no longer the arrogant, loud-mouthed contractor who wore expensive watches and sneered at my South Side upbringing. He was wearing a faded, oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed his shrinking frame. His hair was thinning, his posture was violently hunched, and his wrists were secured in heavy metal chains. He shuffled toward the defense table, his eyes glued firmly to the floor. When he finally dared to look up and scan the gallery, his bloodshot eyes locked instantly onto mine. I did not look away. I did not offer a single shred of sympathy. I just stared at him with cold, unrelenting satisfaction. The federal judge entered the courtroom, and everyone rose to their feet. The proceedings moved with a swift, clinical efficiency that I found deeply satisfying. The prosecuting attorney stood before the judge and meticulously laid out the devastating magnitude of the financial crimes. He projected the forged maintenance invoices onto a large screen for the entire court to see. He detailed exactly how Caleb had weaponized his state contracting license to systematically drain hundreds of thousands of dollars from innocent tenant escrow accounts. The prosecutor painted a crystal-clear picture of a greedy, manipulative man who had eagerly participated in a massive wire fraud conspiracy just to fund his illicit gambling habits and support his brother-in-law's hidden mistress. Caleb's public defender attempted a pathetic, desperate defense strategy. The young, overworked lawyer stood up and tried to cast all the blame entirely onto Desmond. He argued that Caleb was merely a pawn, a victim of a domineering family patriarch, who had coerced him into signing the fraudulent documents. He pleaded for leniency, citing Caleb's previously clean criminal record and his sudden devastating loss of his contracting business and marriage. I listened to the weak arguments with absolute disgust. Caleb had always refused to take accountability for his own failures, and he was still desperately trying to hide behind a dead man's shadow. The judge was completely unmoved by the dramatic performance. She adjusted her reading glasses and stared down at Caleb with sharp, intense disapproval. She reminded him that he was a fully grown, licensed professional who knew exactly what he was doing every single time he forged a signature. She emphasized the profound breach of public trust, noting that stealing security deposits from hardworking tenants was a particularly despicable form of financial predation. The judge systematically dismantled every single excuse the defense had presented, leaving Caleb with absolutely nowhere left to hide. I leaned forward slightly as the judge picked up her heavy wooden gavel. She ordered Caleb to stand and face the court. He rose on trembling legs, tears streaming down his face as he awaited his final fate. The judge sentenced him to 72 months in a federal penitentiary, followed by 3 years of supervised release and a mandatory order to pay full financial restitution to Apex Heritage Holdings. Caleb let out a loud, pathetic sob, his knees buckling under the crushing weight of a 6-year prison sentence. The federal marshals immediately grabbed his arms, pulling him back to his feet to escort him out of the courtroom. As they dragged him toward the side door, Caleb turned his head and looked at me one final time. His eyes were wide with pure, absolute terror. I was finally realizing that his arrogance had cost him his freedom, his marriage, and his entire future. I offered him a slow, satisfied smile. I did not need to say a single word. My presence in that courtroom was the ultimate victory. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind him, permanently locking away the final toxic element of Desmond's deceptive life. Mr. Sterling turned to me and offered a professional nod of profound respect. The legal battle was officially over. I stood up, smoothed out my charcoal suit, and walked out of the courtroom. I navigated the polished marble hallways and stepped back out into the bright, warm Atlanta sunshine. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the fresh city air. Every single person who had tried to steal my joy, my wealth, and my dignity had been completely neutralized. I had successfully severed every toxic tie to my painful past. I stepped into my waiting town car, completely untethered, fiercely independent, and ready to conquer the world. Exactly 12 months have passed since the heavy wooden doors of that federal courthouse slammed shut behind my disgraced brother-in-law. Today, I am 35 years old. I am standing on the expansive wraparound balcony of my absolute newest real estate acquisition. It is a stunning multi-tiered penthouse suite located in the very heart of downtown Atlanta, soaring high above the bustling city streets. The cool evening breeze whips gently around me, carrying the distant, rhythmic hum of the metropolis below. I hold a crystal glass of sparkling water, resting my hands against the sleek glass railing. I am not wearing the muted conservative colors of a dutiful wife anymore. I am wearing a striking tailored crimson gown that commands attention and refuses to apologize for taking up space. Looking down at the sprawling, glittering grid of city lights, I feel an overwhelming sense of profound peace. This city is no longer just the backdrop of my quiet suffering. It is the vast, magnificent chessboard that I now completely own and operate. The journey from a silent, dismissed housewife to the undisputed chief executive of Hayes Development Group was not paved with easy victories. It was forged in the agonizing fires of profound betrayal and fueled by a relentless, unwavering determination to reclaim my stolen dignity. For over a decade, I sat quietly in the background of my own life. I watched a deeply flawed, sterile man parade around our community, accepting accolades and absorbing praise that was entirely financed by my hidden labor. I allowed my in-laws to treat me like a disposable accessory, a convenient stepping stone for their own financial survival. I played the role society explicitly scripted for Black women. We are expected to be infinitely resilient, perpetually forgiving, and endlessly sacrificial. We are conditioned to shrink ourselves so that the men in our lives can stand taller. But the very moment I decided to stop shrinking, the entire illusion violently shattered, exposing the pathetic, greedy parasites hiding beneath the surface. The most insidious weapon they tried to use against me was the sacred concept of motherhood. For 12 agonizing years, Desmond and his toxic family relentlessly weaponized my presumed infertility. They used my empty nursery as a heavy club to batter my self-esteem. They whispered behind my back, claiming I was somehow a lesser woman because I could not produce an heir for a man who did not even have the biological capacity to create one. Asmin, with her youthful arrogance and her stolen pregnancy, genuinely believed that carrying a child automatically granted her the keys to my kingdom. Society teaches women that our ultimate value is inextricably tied to our reproductive capabilities. They try to convince us that a woman without children is fundamentally incomplete, a tragic figure deserving only of quiet pity. But my worth was never located in my womb. My worth is deeply rooted in my brilliant mind, my unyielding spirit, and my exceptional capability to build a lasting, impenetrable empire from scratch. The ultimate equalizer in this brutal, unforgiving world is total financial independence. When Desmond lay in that hospital bed, eagerly plotting to leave me destitute and homeless, he severely underestimated the impenetrable armor I had spent years meticulously crafting. He thought he held the absolute power to destroy me with a single signature on a forged will. He failed to realize that money is not just a tool for buying luxury cars or purchasing designer handbags. Money is absolute, undeniable freedom. Wealth is the heavy iron shield that protects you from the manipulative whims of arrogant men and greedy relatives. By establishing my blind trust and maintaining total control over my own capital, I ensured that no one could ever dictate the trajectory of my life. I did not have to beg for mercy. I did not have to negotiate for scraps. I held the absolute authority to evict the mistresses, fire the traitors, and lock the criminals away in federal prison. I take a slow, deliberate sip from my crystal glass, letting the cool water ground me in the present moment. I did not just survive a catastrophic marital betrayal. I did not just weather the massive destructive storm of public humiliation and corporate theft. I actively became the storm. I strategically positioned my legal and financial pieces across the board for years, patiently anticipating the exact moment my enemies would foolishly expose their true colors. When Desmond finally tipped his hand in that sterile hospital room, expecting to easily checkmate his silent wife, he quickly discovered that I owned the entire chessboard. I ripped the false crown from his head, dismantled his entire fraudulent legacy, and permanently banished his toxic enablers into complete obscurity. I am no longer tied to the tragic narrative of a scorned woman. I am the sole author of a magnificent, unassailable future. If you are watching my story today, and you feel trapped in a situation where your immense value is being completely ignored or actively diminished, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Do not ever allow anyone to convince you that you are small, insignificant, or easily replaceable. Build your financial safety nets in absolute silence. Secure your resources, educate yourself on your legal rights, and never hand the keys to your future over to someone else. You are entirely capable of rewriting your own destiny. Have you ever had to build a secret safety net to protect yourself from toxic family members or a manipulative partner? How did you eventually find the incredible courage to reclaim your personal power? Please share your stories of survival and triumph in the comments section below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who desperately needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of ultimate resilience and sweet, undeniable justice. Remember, you hold the pen to your own life story. Never let anyone else write your final chapter.